Homeschool parents, this is a message for you. As a homeschooler, I know you work hard for us. You have many different things to manage.
Our Thinking, Feeling, Willing program is your roadmap to a successful Waldorf homeschool journey. Gain the confidence you need to be the teacher your child wants and transform your homeschool experience. Homeschooling with Waldorf Essentials is one like no other. You not only have curriculum options, you can also add our Thinking, Feeling, Willing program onto your curriculum. What's in the Thinking, Feeling, Willing program? Rhythm, inner work, temperament, the Waldorf curriculum, learning and strengthening your skills in music, circle time, form drawing, handwork, painting, drawing, modeling, festivals, reading, writing, spelling, eurythmy and movement, and our bonus content. Something else you'll get when you join Waldorf Essentials that you will not find anywhere else is the community, and we all need that as homeschoolers.
This is your invitation to fill your cup. We know you're rooting for us. We are rooting for you too.
So I'm so excited today for our podcast. We have Dr. Adam Blanning with us, and we're going to talk about sleep, Raising Sound Sleepers. This is his new book, Raising Sound Sleepers, Helping Children to Use Their Senses to Rest and Self-Soothe. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here with us. And I think my first question is, how did you come to write this book?
You bet. Well, thanks, Melissa. It's a joy to talk about this together. The book really grew very organically, I have to say. And it's kind of the confluence of a couple of different things coming together.
Mm-hmm.
One is being really interested in children's sensory development.
Right. That's a big thing. And I think a lot of people outside of anthroposophy and Waldorf don't think about that at all.
Yep. And just spending a lot of time with families, with schools, with teachers, thinking about why do children do certain things and what are they trying to gain from it?
Right. Everything always has some sort of reason behind it. And we often like
absolutely
to as parents and adults.
Yeah. And if it's an annoying behavior or a disruptive behavior, we usually say stop or wait or cut that out.
Right.
And that's what you have to do a lot of the time, but it also is really helpful to try and understand why somebody is gravitating towards that.
I agree.
Yeah. And then the other part came from actually just meeting a series of children who were struggling. There were older children in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And
how much older?
Early grades, first grade, second grade, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And finding that they're in a setting where there's one teacher and lots of kids,
Mm-hmm.
and they just needed interaction regularly.
Right.
They were kind of provoking encounter.
Right. And rubbing up against each other probably in the wrong ways. And
sure,
they're not getting what they need at home. It's going to come out in the classroom, or even for the homeschooler, because we serve a lot of homeschoolers, it'll come out in everything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from meals to, it's that rhythm piece that we talk about a lot. So I love that, because I feel like it's that piece of observation that often we adults are not willing to do. We're not willing to step back and go, hey, what's behind this? But what I love is that you introduce the senses in such a lovely way. And I think in a way that people that maybe are not super, familiar with anthroposophy and Steiner's work and all that, they're not going to think about the senses. They might be brand new to this, and they might be thinking, what does that have to do with anything? And it has everything to do with things. And I think it's interesting because you said early, not early childhood, but like early grades. I think that's where I see often that we have this broken down piece about sleep, because maybe we just nursed them to sleep until they were 4 years old, right? And then all of a sudden you go, wait, this isn't working anymore. Or I have this child that won't go to sleep without me, or won't do these things. And rather than stepping back and looking at it, they're looking for advice instead of, stepping back and going, wait, what else could I do? What do you think are the biggest objections that you get from parents with your advice, and how do you counter it?
Sure. Well, again, the book developed out of meeting different kids and different families where it really felt like somebody was stuck.
Right. That's
Where
usually
I think one of the
right. Like, I'm stuck. I've exhausted my repertoire. I need some
yeah,
help.
and maybe a really good way to define that is that whatever you've been doing to help somebody feel more calm, more sleepy, more restful, and whatever worked really well, you're doing it the same amount or maybe even more now, and it's not having the same effect.
Right.
And so,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and so in those situations, it's trying to look and say, well, how do we open things up a little bit in terms of the sensory experiences that children are having?
Right.
I would say probably the questions that come is number one, well, what do you mean? Does this mean that you don't like nursing or breastfeeding?
Right. And then
And
mom goes, oh, wait, what am I doing wrong?
and that's not my message at all.
Right. No, absolutely agree.
Um, and the other one that comes is sometimes, oh, but I love laying with my child in bed.
Oh, yeah.
And that's such a beautiful time for connection. And I'm not sure that I want to give that away. And if you look at the book, there's nothing about not nursing, not nurturing, not connecting.
Right. I agree.
All of those things are essentially, they're essential, they're key ingredients. But it's sort of about changing your task as a parent so that instead of you needing to make somebody go to sleep, you're giving them loving encounter, loving connection to help them feel calm. And then you open a little space for them to practice the last part of going to sleep and self-soothing. I think that's sort of a core piece that sometimes gets misinterpreted, but
right.
It's just opening, not saying we shouldn't be doing these things, because we absolutely need to.
Because it really helps like support their development. So I think when as parents we go, but it really should be, what do they need? What do they need at this stage? Because they're not the babies that they were a year ago or 2 years ago or even 4 years ago, right?
Right.
They're in this other space, and it's respectful for us to learn to connect as they grow. And it's okay for us to be like, oh, I'm so sad that I'm so sad that I'm not laying with them anymore. It's an okay emotion to have. Or I'm melancholy about the fact that we're not nursing anymore, that kind of thing. And those are completely normal emotions, but they're emotions that we have as adults that we ought not give our children. Right? That sort of space.
I think, and I think as adults, we're all trying to find ways to connect and soothe and find love. So it isn't like we get to be adults and these longings for connection and these sensory experiences go away. We still need them too.
Right. And we just see them in a different way. And I think that's the piece that I see often is, if you're not willing to do X, then you don't get to see what comes next. You don't get to see how that connection changes you and how it supports your child. If you're hanging on to that piece, you're not going to get the benefit of the next space, which I think is such an important, it's such an important piece as we work with parents all the way through childhood. Is if we are stuck with the 7-year-old or the 8-year-old, we don't get to see the 12-year-old. We don't get to see how the beauty of that and how it changes. I find that to be such an interesting space for parents that, and I think, and I'm going to kind of hop around a little bit about the things that I sent, but I think I see that the most in parents that say, oh, I'm an attached parent. I'm an attached parent. I can't do that. And I go, wait, like Waldorf in my mind, or Steiner in my mind, is like attachment parenting on steroids, because we're really looking at not just how to keep us connected, but how to understand where they're going. And if we don't take that time to understand where they're going, then why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? We've got to be able to come to that next space. And, so when I get questions from, attached parents, it's this space of like, but what do I do then? then that opens the door. They have to be able to ask us, what do we do? What's the next stage? I love and I think it's about halfway through the book, you talk about acknowledging boundaries, and then this pathway method that you're talking about, like acknowledging, hey, I hear you. And that's that positive parent right there. That's that attached parent of,
Mhm.
I hear you, I see you. But here's the boundary. Like, we're not doing this anymore. And
Right.
and often I think it gets mixed up. And I think that's where attachment parents become permissive parents, is that they have the acknowledgement piece, and maybe they have the pathway piece, but they don't put that boundary in there. And the boundary I find to be crazy important when we're raising children, because they have to know there are boundaries. There are boundaries on us as adults, and there are boundaries on them as children. And maybe that boundary is, hey, guess what? It's just time to go to bed. We're just
Exactly.
doing that. I hear you. I hear you want 16 more cups of water, but the boundary is we're done. Because I know if I give you 16 more cups of water, I'm going to be up 4 times in the night with you. And I don't
Right.
want to be doing that.
Yeah.
Not going to be doing that. I do really love that. And I think that that's one of the, I mean, this has so many gems in it, but I really love how you explain that piece in your book about, taking that acknowledgement place, going, to laying the boundary, because so many parents are just afraid to lay the boundary because that's going to make them a bad mom or dad.
Right. Well, it's good to be attached. It's good to be acknowledging. Sometimes I think we worry that if our children are disappointed or confused, that means we're not doing a good parenting job.
Right.
Um,
That's not at all the
and
case.
giving boundary, actually, when it's a healthy boundary
Mhm.
and when it's a consistent boundary.
Consistent. Yeah, that's really important.
If it's changing all the time, then that's pretty hard to navigate, because
Right.
the child doesn't even know what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
But if there's a consistent signal, like, okay, this is the last step that we do before we turn out the light and it's time to sleep.
Yep. I
And
think
we're
that's
really not going to do a bunch of things after that.
I think that's so important, because I think you had mentioned the parents that read too many books and give too many chances, and like all of that. I find that so interesting, because I encounter that a lot. This people will say, well, what's your nighttime routine? We pray, we do a story, and we turn out the lights. Like, I think especially in the Waldorf world, we like to make things way complicated. Like, thinking that everything needs a verse and everything needs a song and everything. I had a mom once that I was working with, and she started singing I was working in her home, and she started singing a song for her daughter to go to the bathroom. I said, stop that. You don't want to have a space where this child can't use the toilet without singing to them. It's not the end goal here is to just get her to go to the bathroom, not to make sure that she goes in a beautiful way. It's just your body. So I find it very interesting how often we make too many things for our children that are not necessary. They look beautiful on the outside.
Mhm.
On the inside, they're really not necessary. And I think even Steiner would be like, what are you doing?
Right.
Obviously he didn't have any children, but I do think that sometimes we do things and he's like, no, 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 no. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant.
Right. Too complicated. And I think
Yes.
there's also this aspect that sometimes at bedtime we create really nice rituals, a candle, a lavender scented lotion, the right lamp, the perfect stories.
Right.
And these are all done with such love and generosity.
Absolutely.
And we think, if I do all of those things, then they'll be more relaxed and they'll go into deeper sleep, and then they'll sleep through the night.
Right.
But what I found, and this keeps sort of presenting itself over and over again, is that the things that we need to go to sleep at bedtime are the things that we naturally seek when we wake up in the middle of the night.
Right, right, right. No, and I love that, because you talked about that in your portion about senses, about if you train them to go to sleep to taste, they're going to wake up in the middle of the night and want that taste.
Right.
And I think that's so interesting. Or even smell or touch or all of those things. And I think, as a parent, I have 5 kids. I've definitely looked at, as I was reading this, I thought, where did this show up? And it's different for each child, right? Like
Mhm,
I
mhm,
find that temperament has such a big thing to do with a piece to do with it. And
mhm,
some really need that touch in the middle of the
mhm,
night. Some just want to hold your hand, which is
mhm,
I think is why a lot of people co-sleep is that space.
mhm,
Um, and I don't want to pass judgment on those parents where it works, but I co-slept for many years, but I didn't go to bed when my kids went to bed.
mhm.
They went to bed without me, and then I came in later. And I think that's
Right.
a really big piece of they don't actually need me to go to sleep. They just need to sleep. And I do
That's a
like,
great distinction. Yeah.
yes, I do think we make it so complicated. Pardon me. And I think that as parents, we do take our own stuff, whatever you want to call that,
Mhm.
shiznit stuff,
Sure.
and we put it on our children. And we go, well, I didn't have this at night. My parents just said, go to bed. And I went to bed. But then I felt really crappy about, all of that. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen to my child. So I really love the pieces of um inner work. And I was reading this and I thought this is really inner work, like the questions that you have at the end of the chapters and the quick takeaways and tips, because I think that that's a space for parents to go, wait, what am I actually doing here?
Sure.
What is the goal? If the goal is bed, why am I filling this bedtime with all these other things? I
Mhm,
wanted to ask you something, and I had forgotten to put it in our questions I sent you, but I actually tell people no bath before bed, unless it's before dinner,
mhm.
because bath before bed riles them up, especially when you have a household that has 2 or 3 children in it, and you're trying to bathe them all at once, and then
Sure.
they're hyper and excited, and so I've been saying that for years, like no bath before bed. I always did like bath at 4 in the afternoon while I was working on dinner or during main lesson time when we were doing main lessons, because I found that if we're trying to create that space of quiet after dinner, I better not get a bath in there. But I do love, I definitely tell people get a washcloth out if you're not doing a bath. Get a washcloth, wipe them down. That's your
Mhm.
best time to get the oils on them, anything that you're trying to do to calm them. But that bath space I found to be very invigorating for children. It's not for us as adults, but it is for the children.
Yeah. Well, I have memories of my own kids. I even have memories of myself growing up taking a bath, and then you're warm, and it feels like a great time to run naked around the house.
Right.
Um, and and we can sort of pull our hair out to say, oh, I did this because it was going to be calming and quieting. Um, and yes, exactly. I think children, whether it's a bath, there's actually a lot of different things where it can be part of our bedtime routine. And then we see, oh, they want to move, they want to wrestle, they want to touch, they want to feel themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit like um, sometimes I think we need to feel ourselves and then we can relax, which is kind of funny, but um, it's a little bit sometimes like if you see a dog lay down in the grass and it will turn around a bunch of times before it lays down, um, or
Just getting that
lots
safety.
of adults, yeah, who before they go to bed they need to scrub and wash their face, or they need to roll over 3 times in one direction and then 2 in the other.
Right.
um, we've all got ways that we kind of work to organize and orient and center ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I kind of like when kids do those things,
Sure.
because because those are the things that you see in the classroom a lot as well, is somebody's a little disoriented, a little unsure what they're supposed to be doing, so they're going to start finding the experiences that help them feel
Right.
themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's that sensory piece that you talk about in the book that is so different, I find, from other books talking about this, because we often, like I said, just overlook the most obvious thing,
Mhm.
especially as they're growing. If we've done it one
Mhm.
way and now we have to do it another way, but we are taking away this space of like what needs to happen. Like maybe if you nursed to bed, maybe you need a piece of cheese before sleep, or maybe you need some warm drink or something like that to take place of that nursing space. It doesn't mean you should stop nursing. It just means you should definitely as they're changing, like go through that space. I find that so interesting. I also want to talk to you about rhythm because you talk a lot about rhythm in here.
Sure.
And I find that is the biggest piece that families often go, I don't have any rhythm. I go, yes, you do. You just aren't acknowledging what rhythm you have and aren't acknowledging those anchor points that you could use of dinner and no TV after dinner or no TV at all or that kind of thing. You're not acknowledging those pieces, and when we
Mhm,
don't acknowledge them we think we have no rhythm. what
mhm.
what do you what do you see, like when you're talking to families and working with rhythm? What do you see from your point of view?
Sure. Well, I would say one helpful way I think to consider rhythm is that if, say, you eat dinner at the same 20 to 30-minute window.
Mm-hmm. And that's so important because dinner, I tell people, dinner's the runway for bedtime.
Yep. Then when we're doing that consistently, our body gets ready to eat.
Yep.
And so as a medical doctor, I think about these things too,
Right.
because you're going to digest much better if your body has had a chance to prep itself. More stomach acid, your liver, gallbladder, pancreas are more active. I remember my kids in Waldorf preschool and kindergarten, if they had been at school during the week, on Saturday, we better have a snack at snack time,
Right. Or
or
they're
there
gonna
was a
fall.
meltdown. Yeah. And we
Yeah.
suddenly went, oh, yeah, well, that's because their little bodies have been ready for snack at
Mhm.
10:20 every day. And now it's 10:20 the next day. So we better do that.
Right.
So I think eating and sleeping rhythms, if there can be some consistency about them. So for bedtime, a similar kind of window of when somebody's going to sleep. Then again, even if somebody is protesting um, or resisting going to bed, their physiologic clock is going to step in and make it easier for them to go to sleep.
I agree.
So eating, sleeping, and then the third thing that I usually would throw in is going to the bathroom.
Yes, because we forget that, right? I love that your description about putting the snowsuit on and getting all done, and then the child's like, I need to pee.
Right.
Yeah, no, I get that. I totally get that. Having 5 children, I'm like, all right, who needs to use the bathroom? Oh, you didn't think you did? But the potty fairies told me you needed to go potty. So let's go to the bathroom.
Right. The potty fairies. That's
Potty
great.
fairies. I listen to women all the time in the public restrooms, any place that we're going. And I hear a mom like, I think you need to go potty. And I just pop in there and I go, hey, the potty fairies. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I never thought about the potty fairies. I used the potty fairies until my youngest was like 9 years old. And she's like, are you kidding me? Why are we still talking about the potty fairies? And
Uh-huh.
get in there and use the toilet because I know you need to go.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's just funny how it evolves over time. Um,
Mhm.
and I do love that you also talk about times for bed in your book. And I because they're, and I actually love it that we're actually both on the same page because
Oh,
I've been saying that for years. As
yeah.
a mom of 5, I'm like, no, you don't all go to bed at 9 o'clock. You go to
Yeah.
bed at 6:30, you go to bed at 8, like stagger them all. But I find it so interesting. And I don't recall finding this in your book, but I talk about the second wind a lot. And if you don't stick with a consistent bedtime, you're
Mhm.
going to have a child that's like on their second wind. And that second wind, gosh, it could last for 2 years, not 2 years, 2 hours. And
Right.
that's usually when I'm like, put your dang shoes on, we're going for a walk.
Yep.
Because that's the only way to get rid of the second wind. It's the only, so as a parent, I'm thinking to myself, I don't want that second wind to come. I want to make sure that you're in bed before the second wind comes. Because I find the second wind to be annoying as a parent, but also a reminder as a parent that it's not just their time to slow down. It's my time to slow down.
Yeah.
And I think as parents, like, I think rhythm is inconvenient to some adults. If we've not taken that time to slow ourselves down and we've not
Right.
taken that time to teach our children it's time to slow down, it is incredibly inconvenient.
Mhm.
Incredibly
Mhm.
inconvenient. And I think that's one of those places too where, I love that everything is interconnected because I feel like when we are feeling that rhythm is inconvenient to us, it's time to look at our own temperament and say, why is it not safe to slow down? Why is it not safe to, like, where in my life did this come from and what do I need to heal? Because teaching our children to slow down is one of the biggest gifts we can give as parents, you know,
Absolutely.
because kids don't come with that, oh, it's time for me to slow down. That needs to be like, that's our stewardship. It needs to be molded by us. So, let's see, I was going to say, we should talk about what we see in our practices as like some crazy parental habits. Maybe not crazy. Crazy is probably too strong of a word, but some habits. I know that there are habits that I go, wait, nobody ever told you this? Do you have what things like that do you see in your practice?
Well, I see people trying really hard to do the right thing. As an example, I remember a family where somebody would fall asleep very nicely by being bounced on a exercise ball, like a yoga ball.
Right.
And when their child was smaller, it would take 5 minutes, and then got to a certain point. And this is when the child started to really crawl and be active and exploring. And they're bouncing for 45 minutes on the ball, and it's not working at all.
No, and
So that's one where you're trying so hard, and it's getting exhausting.
right.
And also everybody starts to get anxious when it's bedtime,
Oh yes, mom and dad
because
are like,
now you know there's this tug of war that's going to
right.
happen for the next hour.
Mhm.
So that's one piece.
That's a really big one. So many parents say to me, I hate bedtime.
Mhm.
And I'm like, what's wrong? I love bedtime. Bedtime means that Melissa is off duty.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, I'm like, it should be your favorite time of the day, when they
Mhm.
wake up and you're fresh, and when they go to bed and you're not.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's good.
that's
Um,
fun
I,
space.
I I would say maybe another one is feeling that it's good to make a change, but being worried that it's going to be distressing.
Right,
And
right.
so
They're nervous.
continuing to, especially that boundary piece, or
Mhm.
that space of, okay, you're you're not completely asleep, but let's practice what it's like to just rest.
Yes.
Um, and I know people where really it goes on for years, sometimes into early adolescent years, where there's just such fear about
Yes.
creating that space because it feels like an abandonment. And then
Right.
I hear families who will say, um, we talked together as parents, we made a plan, we implemented it, and I was so worried how it was going to go, and it took less than a week.
Right. And that's usually what happens. I think you said something, you talk together as a family. Mom and dad have to be on the same page.
Oh yeah.
They have to be on the same page about this. And I always tell parents, like, listen, what if you could like have the kids in bed and then you and your husband could actually have a conversation? Like,
Mhm.
that's not interrupted 16 times, or that you're not too exhausted to have because you fought for the last 2 hours to get kids into bed. I think once you get the other parent on board, then it usually goes really, really smoothly. Like you said, a week or less. And I find that it is interesting how much fear people have about things like that. And I
Right.
usually say, are you afraid to talk to your husband? Are you afraid to have this conversation? Like because it is so interesting how we put up walls and we have these ideas about things rather than oh wait, this is logical. It's logical that we do
Mhm.
this. And
Mhm.
it's logical that we don't have to be right there for them. I always tell parents, like, okay, so if you've got a child that's waking up in the night, this is what I've done, and it usually works really well. I will, if they, especially if they're not chronic, if they're 6, 7, and they're not chronically awake in the middle of the night, but all of a sudden they're in your bed for 4 nights in a row,
Mhm.
you can keep them from getting past that second night. Just go lay with them and let them know that you're there. And then they usually stop. They usually stop
Mhm.
because they go, oh, wait, it's safe to be here. And mom doesn't
Mhm.
have to be with me, or dad doesn't have to
Mhm.
be with me. But it is having that plan as parents about what we're going to do. I can remember my youngest, and I did this even though I knew better. She was a preemie. She was 5 weeks early. And so it always felt like she was fighting, always felt like she was fighting. And we had we had a naturopath that does like net therapy, and he was like, she does feel like she's fighting, so you got to release her and let her know she doesn't have to fight. So we did this therapy, and we released her and told her she didn't have to fight. But then we got into that, okay, we're just going to drive her around town. And we realized after 6 months we had put like 30,000 miles on our car. And I remember turning to my husband going, okay, we got to stop this, because we know this isn't right. Like, we know this isn't how this kid goes to sleep.
Right.
And because then, you get them to sleep, and then you go to take them in the house, you go to lay them down, and guess what? They're awake again.
Right.
So, it's about really looking at together as parents, like, what can we do to help this child sleep that doesn't rely on us. It doesn't rely on what we need. And it's just so interesting to me. And it is, when it comes to the sensory piece, if you put the child to bed listening to stories, and they wake up in the night, they're going to expect listening to stories or something.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that space of being safe, going back to sleep on their own, is a really important space. Really important space. How do you break parents' habits with regards to things like that? Do you just say, just stop? Cold
Sometimes.
turkey, or
Sometimes it's about cold turkey. Usually it's about simplification. I do find trying to differentiate the kind of connecting, cuddling, relaxing bedtime activities from the bed.
Yes, and I love that you talk about that. Yeah,
So I'm a big fan of bedtime on the couch,
like stories, everything on the couch,
or the floor, or whatever is the usual social space for connection. Because then you're building also the experience that this is the place where we connect.
Right.
If
And
the bed is the place where we connect,
stories, or maybe that's where you do, family time. But
yep.
I do love that it's not. I love that for a few reasons. One, being a mother of many children, that could be our space of, let's do a chapter book together, or let's do, and then you're still older, so I'll let you sit here and read. You're not, let's head to bed. And pardon me. And it becomes this space of it's safe. It's safe. And this is what happens. And this is how we do things. And then the bed is just for bed. I do use the bed, and your thoughts in here have made me wonder about something else. When children cannot not touch each other, and you're a father, so you understand this. I will say, it's time for you to lay in your bed. Is that a bad idea? It's not really time out. It's more taking a breath. So the bed becomes rest.
No, I think as long as bed is connected to rest, that's not bad.
Okay. That's good to hear. That's what I've been doing for a long time.
It's really when bed is the place for sleeping, the place for cuddling, the place for stories, the place for listening to a book on tape, the place for a drink.
Right.
Actually, this was really enforced for me talking to a lot of adults during pandemic work from home time, that sometimes the only place that they had to be able to work was their bed.
Was their bed. Right. And then you associate, yes, I understand that.
And so they're doing Zoom meetings on their bed, or maybe right next to their bed. And then they're doing emails, and they're trying to sleep. And maybe they also are going to watch a movie on Netflix before they go to sleep. And it's all the same place.
Right.
And
wow.
wow.
I'm so guilty of that. And when I have trouble sleeping, I go, I need to quit this.
Right.
So interesting.
And our body really loves the clues to say, here's workplace.
Yep.
Here's social space. Here's sleep space.
I agree. And I think that what we're doing that as adults, our children are definitely doing that as well, for sure. I like to, when we have, like I said, I feel like we have a basketball team, but when we've had trouble getting kids to sleep, I don't generally lay in the bed with them past, 3-4 years old. I generally will say, mommy's gonna sit here on the floor, or mommy's gonna sit in the doorway. So many knitting projects done in the doorway of my children's room. You become really good at knitting in the dark. really good at knitting in the dark. But I find that is a great space to sort of separate, hey, I'm here, but I'm not going to lay there with you. I'm here. I'm not going
Right.
to be right there in that space, because I feel like that does hamper their sleep. That does hamper, what it is. And also, having that boundary on, we're doing 2 stories. And we listen to Sparkle stories a lot. So, it'll be like, you have 1 or 2 Sparkle stories, and then it's off and it's done. And we're not
Mhm.
talking about it anymore. And having that boundary, then they can rely on it, because I find that children that have rhythm, that understand the boundaries, they misbehave less, because they know that this is it, that we're done. We've already had our drink, we've already been potty, going to do these 2 stories, and then the light's going off. And it sounds so scary to some parents, but I find it to be so magical. And you kind of take your power back a little bit. I feel like so often parents think they're ruled by this little person, and really it flips that space back into stewardship. Like, we have stewardship over them, rather than, you know they rule our world. Of course they rule our hearts, but they shouldn't rule
Right.
our world, right? I find it super super interesting. What other things would you like to share about your book? Because I think this belongs in every library, because it covers all the ages, and
Well,
but
I
it's
I
an
love to
adult.
hear that.
Yeah, no, I love it. We will be, when we go live in this podcast, we'll be definitely talking about this on our social, because I find it's a breath of fresh air. And I do love, again, that you start with the census.
Yeah.
It's so important, because it's a connection that many parents don't make.
Yep. Yep. Well, let's see some other thoughts in terms of reclaiming. I love what you just said, because so much of the information that we get is that we need something from the outside to feel good.
Yes.
And a lot of that is built around, here's a product, a service, something
Right.
that we want you to be connected to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good business model to say, here's
Yeah.
something where you won't need anything from us.
And then yes, ever. It's non-consumable.
Right. But trying to build this space where we have more capacity for self-orientation, and for really building the experience of feeling everything that I have is right here.
Right. And our bodies are meant to heal, regulate, all of those things. And we somehow, I think, know that, but think that our children come without those instructions, and
Mhm.
don't encourage that, or bring that forward. And I think that that's sending the wrong message. I know this is a crazy thing, but think about Steiner's talks about math, and how he talks about a child that only learns how to add is constantly trying to add. And if we
Mhm.
can back this up and go, wait a minute,
Mhm.
we have within us what we need. We just have to remind the child. We have to support the child, that they
Mhm.
have what they need. And I think about the children that have something else going on. Like my oldest has autism spectrum disorder. He's figured his life out. He's 26. My youngest is 12. She's got something going on, because she was a preemie. Teaching her to regulate her body, and how to slow down, and how to listen to the birds outside, how to like find that place of even in her body, has been one of the best things I ever taught her how to do. Because then she can
Mhm.
do that at night. She can do that when she's stressed out. She can, and I think that so often we don't think about those very simple pieces, because we're probably not doing them ourselves, maybe.
Well, boy, we sure have to be swimming upstream to claim that space for ourselves, because
Right.
the world has so
I love
much
that. That's right.
information and demand right now.
Agreed.
And I guess the other piece that I find helpful is to remind ourselves, or maybe just as a new concept, that the time each day that we practice quieting the most is
Mhm.
bedtime.
It is.
And for kids too, the most predictable time that you can help them practice feeling quiet and safe
Mhm.
and secure and restful is bedtime. And if they can build that experience, then they can start to take that into the classroom. They can take that into any kind of transition time. And that's a great life skill.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
It is that space of really like working to regulate ourselves. And, I can imagine if you've got a classroom full of 30 children and only 10 of them have that skill, the other children are going to rub off on those 10 that have that skill. So those 10 are going to have to really work on it harder to be in that regulation space. And that poor teacher, I always feel bad for them.
Sure.
I always feel bad for them. What would you recommend for caregivers, teachers, people that aren't the primary person with them all day? What would you recommend for them to help them be somewhat of a positive space in regulating and resting? What would you recommend to them?
Well, I think allowing space for that to really happen. Sometimes as adults, we get into the pattern also of bedtime for us is that we push and push until we crash. And we're just so tired that we can't do anything more. And that's not really allowing us to go into that slowing, quieting space either. So being honest and self-reflective a little bit and saying, how can I build that capacity for myself?
Right. I think it's so important, especially, in these days of labeling ourselves and, oh, I have this going on. Oh, I have that going on. Oh, I got ADHD. Oh, I've got that. I go, all right, first, I'm definitely like a skills before pills kind of person.
Mhm.
What skills can you gain
Mhm.
before you go and ask for a pill to fix it?
Mhm.
And I'm, as a doctor, how do you tackle that when people come to you? Do you ask them what skills are you recommending, or what skills are you are already doing before I write you a prescription?
Yeah, well, it's a lot talking about where are the places that something feels missing or feels stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to build context around that to say what's really the need that stands behind that. So pills still have a place,
Right.
but if we can diversify the number of ways that we can meet that need.
Right. I think that's important.
Which sometimes their medication, sometimes their nutrition, sometimes their activity, sometimes their sensory experience, sometimes their social connection.
Right.
We can just feed from a lot of different sides. Yeah.
Completely agree. There's the spiritual space and all of that. There is a book by Audrey McGowan called Sleep, and she talks about the different stages of sleep and what it is that we're missing if we don't have those stages of sleep. But she doesn't talk about what's in here. So I find this to be that very first step. And like, I think I have a list of books I usually send people that I know that have gotten pregnant, or, I send You Are Your Child's First Teacher. This is going on the list because it really covers all the pieces. And again, I love the questioning. I like just the questions in chapter 1 about our sensory experiences and how did we meet these things as a child, and because it really does teach us. It teaches us how we face the world. And if we don't teach these things to our children, who will? They will become 30, 40-year-old people that don't have these skills. And we teach them how to calm. We teach them how to sleep. We teach them those pieces. And if we have a chaotic life, it's going to be a lot harder, a lot harder.
And if we have a chaotic life, we probably need those skills
Yes.
even more.
Yes, because we're probably not sleeping very well. I always ask people when they say, oh, we're having trouble sleeping, I go, all right, well, so how's your own sleep? Like, what does your own sleep rhythm look like? Do you get up before your kids, spend time getting centered before you meet them? At nighttime, are you going to bed when they're going to bed? Or are you actually, using that time to center yourself and get ready for the next day and do a little segment intending for the next day and what you're doing? And most of the time they say no, that's not what we're doing. And that's, when I look at them, I go, well, that's why your child can't do it, because you don't know how to do it. So let's teach you how to do it and teach you some of these very sound principles. And then you can impart them to your child. But we can't give from an empty well,
No.
And I find that very interesting. Okay, any other things that you want to share with us?
I'm glad to hear the book is useful.
I love it. I'm going to be recommending it all over. I find it very, very crucial. I think it's funny because people go, oh, I heard you say this, and then I read somebody else said it too. I'm like, yes, couldn't you just have listened to me? But it's okay.
Well, truth is truth.
Right. So I find it a great support for new parents, older parents, adults, like all of people that are thinking about being parents, all of that, because I find that those pieces, if we have them when we start having children, we have that calm, then you're going to struggle less. You're going to, all of us struggle with am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? Like all of those things, but you will struggle less with your child if you can really instill the sleep space, because I agree with one of the things you said in here about people just not getting enough sleep. And I have another friend, she said, my doctor told me sleep is medicine, and it is medicine. Like it is such a space of resetting, resting, giving your body a break. And if we can't teach our children how to do that, they're going to struggle. They're totally going to struggle. Well, I appreciate the time that you spent with me, Dr. Blanning, and I appreciate your book, and I can't wait to talk to everybody about it. I find it, again, such a breath of fresh air, and I hope that, like, my biggest takeaway from the book is understand your senses, understand your habits, understand those pieces so that your children can start to understand. And I really appreciate the time we spent today.
That's great. Thank you, Melissa.
The vision of education has changed. More and more families have seen the benefits of homeschooling and are choosing a different life. Our desire is to bring together qualified teachers with families who are yearning for a Steiner-centered experience. We are a worldwide virtual school. Our goal is to give every child the opportunity to have a true Steiner-centered education at an affordable price, all while allowing families the flexibility to follow their passions. We invite you to attend our question and answer or send us an email with all your questions and start envisioning how Seasons of 7 can help your family live their best life.